Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're taking a look at MSI's budget wonder. This is the B460M Pro VDH Wi-Fi. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we're taking a look at the B460M Pro VDH Wi-Fi from MSI. This is pretty much a budget board. Doesn't have a great deal of features, but actually ticks a lot of boxes, especially if you're planning on doing a 10th gen build on a budget and you want a bit of performance, but you don't want to break the bank. Now, I will say, first of all, I did actually pick this board up for an extremely cheap price from CCL here in the UK, from their clearance section, and we paid, I think, just under £40 for this, including postage. It was essentially a factory refurb. The box, as you can see, is there. That's basically how it came. No accessories, no nothing. So obviously, if you are buying one of these boards yourself as new, you will get all the other accessories, such as things like, well, I/O shield for one, instruction manual, M.2 screws, all that kind of stuff, which sadly I haven't had, but it isn't a problem. We can get around those things pretty easily. But what we did get is a fantastic board for a really good price. Now, normally this board will retail somewhere in the region of anywhere between £80 to £120, depending on where you shop. I will put some affiliated links in the video description just in case you want to pick up a brand spanking new one. And actually, at the moment, it's probably not a bad idea. You can pick up some absolute gem processors from the 10th gen from Intel at very, very low prices. So if you were considering a budget AMD build, but you're struggling to find a processor, but you can find tons of motherboards, on Intel, it's the exact opposite. 10th and 11th gen processors you can pick up very, very easily at extremely low prices. And we actually managed to pick up a 10105F, which is what you can see here. This costs us somewhere in the region of about £65 here in the UK, which is a 4-core, 8-thread processor. Absolutely perfect for a budget gaming machine. Anyway, that's enough about the whys and wherefores. Let's take a look at the board and see what it offers us. So we'll go through, do a quick tour around the board, all the individual components and also all of the connections. We'll talk about some of the other features as we go through, and towards the end of the video we'll come up with my final thoughts. But you can pretty much guess already, I'm pretty stoked with this. Again, for less than £40 with the processor as well. Total price, including all the postage, etc., was way under £130. This is a really potent little combo for some 1080p gaming. Right, let's start off in the top corner. So we've got our 8-pin EPS connection. Pretty much that's all we need. This board, because it is based on the B560 chipset, it is a pretty much lockdown affair. Now, we do have XMP profiles which we can enable, although you are going to be limited RAM speed wise up to 2933 MHz, and that is going to be dependent on the processor you use. Now, of course, you can use 10th gen processors from the Core series, Pentium Gold series and the Celeron series, all of which the most you can get on i9 is 2933 MHz on that XMP profile. When you're looking at the Pentium Golds and also some of the Core series, you're going to be looking at 2400 or 2666. So RAM wise, you could actually potentially save some money there by getting some lower frequency RAM. Something which does strike me about this board is actually the amount of weight they've put into the heat sinks for the VRM. Now, the VRM on this isn't particularly good. Again, this isn't a board for overclocking. There's very, very little you can do. MSI have integrated Core Boost, so you can actually get a little bit more out of your processor than you would on possibly some other platforms, and this is going to be aided by those VRM coolers. The VRM setup on here appears to be a very basic affair, so it's a 3+2+1 setup. Not brilliant, but certainly this is rated to take up to i9 processors should you wish to, although realistically I think the target audience for this is pretty much going to be your lower end Pentium processors and also those Core processors in the i3 and i5 range. Obviously in the middle there we've got our socket, so this is LGA 1200 socket. Cooler wise, lots of compatibility with other coolers on the market using the 11.5X method. The LGA 1200 is exactly the same, so no issues there. Loads and loads to choose from. And actually, because now Intel have gone over to LGA 1700 and soon to be 1800, you will start seeing some of those older coolers coming down at very good clearance prices. So moving on from the heat sinks, again, nice chunky heat sinks on both of the VRM sets there, so that's really nice to see. We've got 4 RAM slots, so this is going to support up to 128 gigabytes of RAM. Again, we are going to be limited to our RAM frequencies, but we will still be able to enable those XMP profiles, albeit you'll get your CAS latencies, etc., but you won't get those frequencies. Moving along, we've got our CPU fan header, which for some reason is stretched all the way over here. Well, I would have liked to have seen it a little bit closer in, but it is what it is, I guess. You've also got a pump fan header there, so that can be used for your choice really. If you are using an AIO, you can connect it to a pump. If you're connected to a regular fan, you can use it as a regular PWM fan or even VDC. One of the nice things, and I do say this about a lot of the MSI boards, I really like MSI's implementation of their fan control methods, both in BIOS and also in the MSI Center, giving you a lot of flexibility and the options to choose between PWM, voltage DC, or just fan type control. So lots of flexibility, and it does seem to work very, very well. For those of you interested, so if you don't want to watch the whole video, fan header wise, you've got 4 fan headers in total. That is inclusive of the CPU fan header, so basically CPU plus 3 fan headers. Moving down slightly, we've got our easy debug LEDs. These are super useful, probably more so for the AMD setups. We do get a lot of people with issues with just the CPU LED coming on because they haven't done a BIOS flash or something's not quite right. With Intel, pretty much you can guarantee, as this is designed out of the box for 10th gen processors, essentially it supports all of them out of the box, so you shouldn't have to do any BIOS updates, which is actually very handy because we don't have a BIOS flashback button, so you are going to need a compatible processor if for some reason you want to flash the BIOS to a newer revision. Moving down, we've got our 24-pin ATX power, usual situation there in the exact same place it is on pretty much every single board. Moving down, we've got another couple of fan headers here, so this is system fan header 1 and 2. Just under that, you've got JDP1, which is one of those kind of random port switches on there, which is essentially just for factory use, that kind of thing. So you don't need to use that one at all. Moving down from there, we've got our SATA ports. So we've got 4 SATA ports on here. One of the SATA ports, if you do choose to populate the top M.2 slot with a SATA-based drive, you will lose SATA port 1, but you still have 3 ports spare. So no issues there, SATA 3, 6 gigabit per second. So yeah, usual kind of deal. Tiny little heatsink over the B460 chipset there. Doesn't need a great deal of cooling. It runs very cool, and you do find actually there's quite a few boards, especially on the OEM market, that don't have a cooler on it whatsoever. So that's going to be absolutely fine. Moving across to our front I/O at the bottom here. So we've got our front panel connector with the usual kind of setup. Above that, there is a 4-pin connector, so you can use that for a system BIOS speaker, that kind of thing. And next to that, we've got our dreaded TPM connector. So if you wanted to add an external TPM device for Windows 11 compatibility, then certainly you can go ahead and do that there. Moving along, we've got our USB 3.0 front panel header connection, and above that there is JCI1, which is basically chassis intrusion switch. Basically no one's ever going to use that, so I would ignore it altogether. Essentially it will just tell management if the case has been opened. If it supports that kind of switch, it will send a notification, all that kind of stuff. So something which very, very few people will actually ever use. Moving along, we've got 2 USB 2.0 headers there, both supporting 2 ports straight out of the box. So that's going to give you 6 in total of USB 2.0, including the 2 on the back, which we'll take a look at shortly. Next to that, there is a LPT port, which is something which I haven't seen in a very, very long time for old style printer ports. Next to that, something else which we don't see a great deal of these days either, is a COM port. So that is for basically connecting up things like displays and various other kind of technical hardware. Again, both of those you probably never ever use. Moving along, we've got 2 of the more important ports for me personally. So we've got our J Rainbow, which is your 5-volt addressable RGB, and also we've got our J RGB, which is our 12-volt RGB. So for those of you who like a little bit of RGB, you do have connections there, and of course that can be controlled from the motherboard in the BIOS. There's settings in there to turn it either on or off, and also you can control it fully through MSI Center should you wish to install it. Moving along into the corner, so we've got our front panel audio connector for the Realtek ALC 897 chipset, which is on board. It does support 7.1 surround sound, but unfortunately, due to the way that there's only 3 ports on the back, you will have to invoke the front panel connector to get that 7.1 surround if you're doing it the analog way. Otherwise, if you're doing it via HDMI, it's going to be absolutely fine. In the corner, we've got the capacitors for the audio chipset. Above that, we've got our JT1, which is a Thunderbolt header connector if you want to use a Thunderbolt port. And moving up from that, we've got our CMOS battery, and next to that, we've got JBAT1, which is the CMOS reset short switch. So if you dial in some settings in the BIOS that you're not happy with, or the system won't boot, you can either remove the battery or short out that connection there to reset the CMOS. Moving back down, so we've got our PCI Express Gen 3 ports. So there's a ×1 port there and a ×1 port there, if you want to use either of those. Moving across slightly, we've got an M.2 slot, so this is M.2 2. So this is supporting PCI Express Gen 3 x 4. It is only PCI Express NVMe drive supported in that particular slot. If you want to use a SATA-based M.2 drive, you would need to use the one from the top, which is supplied directly from the CPU. That one supports both NVMe drives and SATA-based drives as standard. Sandwiching in between those, we've got the PCI Express Gen 3 x 16 slot for your graphics cards, etc. So yeah, pretty much all works out there. I would have liked to have seen a couple of M.2 covers. I thought actually originally when I got this board, I looked at it and I thought, well, where are the M.2 coolers? And as it turns out, those aren't actually included with this board anyway, looking from the original pictures from the factory. Also, on the back there is, looks like there's a cover missing here for the Wi-Fi card, and actually, in fact, that is actually how it's meant to be. So, although this board, when I got out of the box, did look extremely bare, essentially that is what it is designed to be. A very bare looking board with all the bare essentials, but actually a lot of the features that a lot of people are going to use, such as those fan headers, M.2 drives, and also Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, etc, etc. Speaking of which, let's take a look at the rear I/O and we'll go through what that offers us. So on the back here, a relatively decent affair actually, to be honest with you. Some things that you don't probably need, but you may want to. This kind of hints towards its kind of pro level or more office-based work. So we've got PS2 ports. There are some companies which still insist on not having any USB for obviously confidentiality, transferring files, all that kind of stuff, and they will actually disable all the USB ports. So keyboard and mouse port, should you wish to. Underneath that, you've got two USB 2.0 ports. Next up, we've got a VGA port. That's something I haven't seen for a long time as well. Again, going back to that kind of legacy stuff, if you're using a PS2 keyboard and mouse, there's a possibility you're going to use a VGA port. Now, these are going to have to be powered from the CPU itself, purely. If you're using a discrete graphics card, obviously those won't be in use at all. You will need a processor, such as the 10600, for instance, not the 10600F. The F versions don't have onboard graphics, so if you do want to use those ports, make sure you get a processor without the F on the end of them, so you will get some graphical display on there. Underneath that, we've got a DVI-D dual link port, and next to that there is an HDMI port. HDMI port's going to support up to HDMI 1.4, so that's going to give you 4K 30 Hz. Not brilliant, but certainly will get the job done for most people. Next to that, we've got 4 of our USB Gen 3.2 ports. Those are Gen 1, so those are going to be 5 gigabits per second. So you've got 4 on the back, and also from the front panel header, you've got another 2, so that gives you 6 in total. Above that, we've got our Realtek 8111H chipset, so that's going to provide you with gigabit LAN. And next to that, we've got our Intel AC3168 chipset, so that's going to give you up to 433 megabits per second on your Wi-Fi AC rating. And also it has got integrated Bluetooth 4.2. This is actually quite an interesting one because it is on one of those E-key type setups. So you can, if you want to, there is a small screw, which is visible there, which you probably see some close-ups of. A couple of screws on the back, so undo those 2 screws and that screw there. You can actually remove the Wi-Fi card in its entirety, and you can replace it with a newer model should you wish to later on down the line. Obviously, it does have to be compatible with the Intel chipset, so that is something to bear in mind. And will give you some option to upgrade to Wi-Fi 6 or 6E, those kinds of things, or maybe even Wi-Fi 7 when it comes out. So on the back, you've got 2 Wi-Fi SMA type connectors. Sadly, again, because this was a bare board, I didn't have the antennas included with the kit, but they're really simple to get. And actually, if you do want some replacement antennas, and actually some high gain ones, I'll link those in the video description also, so you might want to check those out if you've got onboard Wi-Fi and maybe your existing Wi-Fi is struggling, and that is why you're looking at changing your board. Maybe you don't need to change your board, maybe you just need to change your antenna. Moving across, down from that, so we've got the 3 audio ports there, pretty straightforward what they are. So you've got green for your earphones or speakers, pink for your mic, and blue for the line in. So again, that is on that Realtek 897 chipset, which is absolutely fine, gets the job done, and actually there's a ton of motherboards all using that same chipset, and they do absolutely fine. Obviously, if you want to, you can upgrade it at a later date with an audio DAC, that kind of thing, but certainly gets the job done. So there we go, that is pretty much it for this board and the tour of the board. I've got to be honest with you, I'm really looking forward to building in this. The combination of this board, that cheap processor, this is going to be a really potent little system. Mix it with maybe a used graphics card, or if graphics cards get to a cheaper price, then something a little bit more upmarket, but certainly pairing this with maybe an RX 6600, that kind of level, or maybe an older graphics card if you're picking up a used one, maybe something like a 1066 gig. Going to give you a really nice foundation for running some games, 1080p, pretty decent settings as well. If you want to see the build on this, we will be doing a build video coming up very shortly, so stay subscribed for that. Also as well, if you want to see what the BIOS is like and have a tour of that, there will be a follow-up video showing the BIOS and all the kind of intricacies in there, things you can change, tweak, etc. There isn't going to be a great deal, but certainly we will do it anyway. So hopefully that's given you a good primer for this board and giving you an idea of what you can expect. I've got to be honest with you, CCL clearance section at the moment for me is super exciting. Loads and loads of really great deals if you're prepared to take a little bit of a risk. Obviously, I am going to have to find some sort of I/O shield, some Wi-Fi antennas, those kinds of things. But other than that, this is a fully functioning board. I have actually put a processor on there and tested it. It does work and does do what it's meant to do. So I've saved somewhere in the region of about 40 to 60 pounds on this board, which I think is excellent, which is essentially the price of the processor. So you can't go wrong, you really can't. So let me know what you think about this one in the comments section below. Are you looking at building a budget system and you're kind of searching around and you hadn't thought of maybe going back to Intel 10th gen? If that is the case, let us know in the comment section. I'll be very, very pleased to hear from you. So that's going to wrap this one up. I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the build video. Thanks for watching.